Tá bom, chega. Você vai embora, tchau.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Deep Dive Zone, a Sonic the Hedgehog rewatch podcast for fans of all shapes and sizes. I'm your host, Devin, here in post to inform you that for our 6-week journey across the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, you're going to hear some inconsistencies in sound quality due to recording across multiple sessions, and in our personnel as Bruce was not present for the entirety of the show. So if things seem a little off to you in regards to these 6 episodes, that's going to be why. With all that said, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the show. So, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, the first Sonic cartoon to air on American television. I mean, there was commercials, but first, syndicated Sonic television series.
The show feels kind of like a fever dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just it's a collection of 65 episodes that may as well be about nothing in terms of what's actually going on. I mean, you've got a very strict sort of adherence to formula where pretty much the first half of every episode, you'll have the setup, which could be something different, but then you'll have like 6 to 7 minutes of scratch and grounder hijinks.
Mm-hmm.
It is true that there isn't really much when it comes to plot within each episode, but I was surprised that between episodes, there is actually some stuff to read into. There are some recurring characters and elements. The show has a bit of a continuity, believe it or not.
A little bit, yeah.
It weaves a tapestry of slight strangeness through its use of certain characters, I guess. I guess recurring characters would be the most common thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because I decided that, the most shallow Sonic show, I don't think it gets more shallow than this. Let's get like overly serious about it and try to analyze it. So I looked over it and I'm like, okay. So going into it from beginning to end, I had a number of questions like, well, what is Robotnik's role in this show with relation to the planet Mobius? Unlike in other shows, he's kind of just like a nuisance, it seems like.
Yeah,
He
he's
has
just kind of there.
Yeah.
He's kind of self-declared world dictator, and people just kind of take him seriously. Like, he can be legitimately dangerous in this show, but a lot of times he's just so unpleasant that it feels like people just go along with it.
Yeah, he's comically evil. More so than normal, I should say. Most versions of Eggman are, to some degree, but to the utmost level in this show. That doesn't stop him, though, from time to time, to having some legitimately menacing moments. Like, I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, no, and I think even when he is, not at his best, I would still call Robotnik the best character in this show.
Oh, 100%. He's the most entertaining, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree. Well, I should say I didn't really dislike the show all that much, but taking it for what it is, I think Robotnik is pretty fun.
Yeah.
I think it's not just because he's a complete ham in every script, but I also think that his voice actor for this show, Long John Baldry, who I think is, normally known for his singing career, but he just hams it the hell up in this series.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. It's true that really what he brings to the role makes it that much better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a shame because, as we'll be getting into for some of these episodes, Scratch and Grounder seem designed to have the most annoying voices possible, but I don't think that's the actor's fault.
Yeah.
No, I can't blame the actors, especially since there are times when they do different voices because whatever gimmick of the week might make them talk a little differently, and they're not as annoying when they're not doing their regular voices.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of Scratch and Grounder, again, me being overly serious, I was like, what the heck? Why are Scratch and Grounder like routinely? Well, first of all, they're just stupid and don't follow Robotnik's orders very well. Okay, I get that. But like multiple times, they straight out betray him. I was surprised the first time they did it, but it's really weird. The Badniks in the show seem to be, when they're created, they have like a tentative alliance. But if anything pops up that to indicate that basically it would be better for them to not be working for Robotnik, they'll take the opportunity.
This is something that we're going to see a lot in American Sonic continuities and would eventually bleed over to the games, which is that Eggman or Robotnik tends to have a lot of minions that just think that he sucks. and only work with him, either for their own gain or because they don't, they're afraid of him. How do you guys?
Yeah.
We've seen the way he treats his badniks. I'm not surprised that they're afraid of him.
How do you guys feel about Jaleel White as Sonic?
Honestly, I think it fits fairly well for the era.
I think he's great. I have no complaints at all.
Yeah.
I was honestly a little worried going back to this that I would dislike Sonic because, Jaleel White, Urkel voice is like, oh god, I'm scared of that. But in terms of what he actually does, it's not a reserved performance per se, but he actually, no, he puts his all in, and
yeah, I think he does Sonic justice. Yeah, he does Sonic justice.
Yeah.
Well, I may have just already been used to the voice because I grew up with this show and Sonic Underground. I even saw maybe an episode of Sad AM. So this portrayal of Sonic, I was like, yeah, it's Sonic. I'm just used to the voice.
And I mean, I had some of that too, but not nearly as much, especially since, the first voice I knew for Sonic was Ryan Drummond in Sonic Adventure. So, yeah.
I'll use this discussion of Sonic to transition back into the lore. It's interesting, Sonic's character in this show, much of a Bugs Bunny-esque sort of a character, as they really seem to want to make more a fool of Robotnik than actually stop him.
Yeah.
At least a few times, they have an opportunity to stop him for good right in the palm of their hands, and they just don't take it for some weird reason. Despite citizens talking about, hopefully one day you'll defeat him. And that's interesting because it seems like he's more having fun with the situation than seriously fighting against him.
Right.
It's just, the unhinged nature of the show, which the visuals of the show, I'd say, are actually pretty fitting for all things considered.
Oh yeah, very colorful, rainbow explosions and whatnot.
It's colorful, but it's also a complete mess. The show, it was mostly the character designs and just visual aesthetic was done by Milton Knight, I believe. And it's like, I don't really like the result, but it is expressive and it is unique.
Yeah.
It feels like, it's going to sound weird, but it feels like too much.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's a bit over the top, but then again, I take some solace in the fact that I'm not the target audience even slightly.
Oh yeah, of course.
When I was younger, this was great. Honestly, it was my of the three shows where Jaleel White voiced Sonic. This was my favorite when I was a young lad because it's just so out there and zany.
And I never got to see Sad AM as a kid, so this was my favorite over Underground, although I wouldn't have been able to tell you why at the time.
But yeah, some of the silliness is a bit much. Some of it I can appreciate now, though. Whenever they do something cartoony, like Eggman cracking open rotten eggs, and then instead of there's yolks, but then like socks and bones and metal and junk coming out, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's funny. That's cartoony. That's good.
Yeah,
I do like
that's good cartoony.
Exactly. But at the same time, it seems like they really were trying to just pump out the episodes as without much thought to, depth or even quality for that matter. The amount of animation errors, maybe they're about on par with other shows at the time. I don't really know. But I was surprised how often something was colored wrong.
Well, this was Deke Animation, and like if internet goers know them for anything, it's for slightly dodgy animation in their adaptations of video games.
Right.
The Mario show has a ton of this. The Zelda show is technically part of the Mario show, but that's got a ton of that. And Captain N, the less said, the better. Mega wow, dude! Sonic's not in Captain N, so we don't have to talk about it.
Okay,
I'm
not really familiar with that. So good. Okay. So this is a kids show, which leads to one, no depth at all, but interestingly, they did try to at least make it somewhat worth the kids' time with the Sonic Says segments, which is famous, so a lot of people know about those already, if they don't really know this show. Yeah, some of the advice, I'm like, okay, sure, but the portrayal is just as wacky as the rest of the show, and some of the advice is a little strange.
Yeah, we have plenty of notes on weird Sonic Says moments, so that'll be fun to get to.
And lastly, I didn't talk about it when we talked about Robotnik before, but I'd like to bring up in advance Another reason why I like Robotnik so much in this show, I mean, aside from being so fun, he's got like the most lore of any character. I was surprised how much backstory comes up across the show. You could build out a timeline if you wanted.
It's a bunch of like random backstory also.
That's
It
true, kind
paints
of all
a
over the
picture
place.
of this tortured, misguided soul.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, let's get right into it with Episode 1, SSSSS Squad, or Super Special Sonic Search and Smash Squad. When Sonic and Tails are captured by Grounder and Scratch, Sonic tricks them into letting them escape by reminiscing about how they all met. So I find it funny that immediately the very first episode of this show is a flashback, so that it can be both an introduction and still be syndicated.
Mm.
Yeah, so it was interesting to start on this one. This is where my questions sort of began, because I got some inkling about how this show is strange when it comes to, again, the lore. Robotnik gets a bunch of bounty hunters, but they're just the robots that he made himself. So I'm like, why are you paying your own robots? But that's like the first hint that the Badniks are really just their own entities.
Right. They don't do anything for him unless they get something out of it.
Yeah, I originally had more written about the bounty hunter robots, but the only thing that I have left here is that all of the bounty hunter robots in this first episode are the main enemies in Mean Bean Machine, which places that game in a questionable place in the timeline.
Yeah, I guess he must have rebuilt them. He rebuilds Scratch and Grounder all the time, but I don't know why he never reused these within the show's canon. I guess maybe I'd have to imagine maybe give him one more chance and they just failed. And Scratch and Grounder are supposed to be like his super special Sonic Search and Smash squad, so he holds them more highly, I guess, even though really they're useless. Speaking of their creation, though, I thought it was pretty great how instead of like properly building them, he just throws a bunch of symbolic objects in a machine, and then boom, Scratch and Grounder.
Sugar and spice and everything nice.
Yes.
But a secret dose of chemical stupid mixed up the whole thing.
Yeah. I also have an important note here. I take it as canon that Robotnik is bald in this show because he ripped out all his hair from stress over fighting Sonic.
That sounds about right.
Grounder can just be or do whatever the plot demands, because he's got so many gadgets that don't even make sense. I think he just turns his hand into a pumpkin at one point. I think at another point he just turns it into like a blow-up doll.
This will not be the last stupid lackey of Eggman that can turn into anything it needs to, as I have recently learned.
I mean, it's a useful ability to have.
Yeah, no, I didn't have anything. I didn't blink at it. Along with all the other insanity of the show, I was like, okay, yeah, he just has a million different gadgets. I mean, honestly, it's not even that much of a stretch to think, okay, well, some of them are oddly specific, but I'd imagine that he swaps them out, like Robotnik upgrades them or something between episodes. Although, yeah, I don't understand why he'd have a pumpkin. Speaking of Grounder, though, this was when I got the first inkling that Scratch is a bad chicken. But Grounder, I think if Scratch wasn't around to be, you know, the bad influence, the bad older brother, I don't think Grounder would be a menace at all. At the end of the flashback sequence that this whole episode is, they're like crying, like they were touched by a well-told tragedy, and I was like, whoa, like they've got like sort of a sweet side to them.
I see stuff like that in, you know, especially older cartoons that don't try to have any plot, because modern kids cartoons really love to try and up their lore intentionally, and that means that they can actually like change things. But I always felt like annoyed at old kids shows that I watched in childhood, how they would sometimes play into a thing like that, but it would never actually go anywhere.
Well, I know Scratch and Grounder are in the comics at least somewhat, so maybe there's something there.
No.
Well,
I've read them. No.
You broke my dreams. Oh well.
Don't worry, the comics will have enough ways to do that themselves.
Okay.
So let's talk about the PSA of this episode, which is about not calling 911 when you don't have to, except they say that while Sonic and Tails are being assaulted by killer robots.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like that would be the right time to do it.
Yeah, some of them, the situations are a little strange because they're still within the universe of the show, yet they're trying to talk about serious lessons. Although it's strange, it's almost like the Sonic Says segments are in a slightly different universe, because sometimes Scratch and Grounder will just be like, "Oh, okay," or whatever. They'll sort of take the advice seriously. Sometimes they'll like screw it up anyway.
Maybe they're just like the mean kid at school in some universe here.
Exactly. That's the way they come off in the Sonic Says segments. It's kind of strange.
Mm.
Episode 2, Subterranean Sonic. Sonic and Tails escape underground from Scratch and Grounder, but they're held captive there by a miserly mole named Spelunk. Here's the thing that we've discovered, is that Lauren has taken much more in-depth notes on this show than me. I have all of like 5 notes for this episode, and they're usually just things like, "This is not Marble Zone, what are you talking about, Robotnik?"
My note on Marble Zone is I was surprised that they actually brought up something from the games. This will obviously, obviously I can't talk. Obviously, this is not the only time they do it, but this is the first time, I think, other than obviously major things like, Sonic's there. But I was surprised they even brought in Marble Zone, even though, yeah, obviously it's not Marble Zone.
It's funny that this show so often uses the names of levels from the games without actually representing anything about those levels.
Yeah, they do that a few times, that is true.
Tails gets hit on the head with a crystal at one point, and that totally should have killed him. Those things are massive, and they're heavy, and they're sharp.
Okay, so yes, as this show goes on, the plot armor becomes completely impossible to ignore, both obviously for the heroes and for the Saturday morning cartoon villain. It is ridiculous what they go through. At least, though, with Scratch and Grounder, they fall to pieces most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's because it's not like a Tom and Jerry thing, where, like, in that show, for the most part, Jerry is just immortal and nothing can get to him, but that's because the joy of the show is just watching in what kind of funny violence these characters do to each other. The show, it doesn't try to have a plot exactly, but it tries to be a conflict, and in that regard, it's like, oh, they can just be hit by literally anything, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the characters getting injured usually is simply for comedic effect, and typically they're only actually done in when the plot decides that it's the end of the episode and it's time for them to be done in. There isn't even a hard cut usually. It's just like, well, I guess I'm going to stop trying at this point. I mean, the main plot is foiled, but there's no reason they couldn't keep going a lot of the time.
Well, that's the thing that I've noticed.
Sorry.
Is that this episode is a great example of that, because this is an episode where Robotnik is trying to steal treasure from this cave, and it's like, oh, they defeat Robotnik or whatever that means, but then they just leave the treasure there at the end. Anyone could just come and take it.
Right, that is true. It doesn't always feel quite resolved. My remaining notes on this episode are just, at this point, well, no, I mean, there are times throughout that I find things particularly funny. Sometimes Scratch and Grounder are super annoying. Actually, sometimes. A lot of the time. But sometimes their shenanigans hit me just the right way. Such as, let's see, what was this? It was where Robotnik gets super furious at Scratch for saying, we're going to be rich. And Robotnik's like, what did you say? And then Scratch is like, did I say we'd all be rich? And then Grounder just off screen, very deadpan, says, yep. And I'm just like, wow, you betrayed your brother without a second thought.
I don't even think he did it on purpose.
It's true. Grounder is definitely an extra brand of stupid in all sorts of ways compared to, well, yeah, no, I would say all the characters except for Sonic and Tails. Even the good side characters often fall for Robotnik's silliness or whatever without thinking twice.
Very trusting the cast of a children's cartoon show usually is.
Yes, indeed. Oh yeah, as I was trying to piece together the situation of this show, this was the first bit when I'm like, oh, there's a hint of some greater purpose here, because Sonic calls himself a freedom fighter, and I'm like, that's weird. Which implies that, he's like against Robotnik's regime or something. But in this show, they don't really have a stable regime like in the comics or SATAM when we get there, or Underground.
Yeah, Sonic doesn't really have any sort of ideology in this show. It's just kind of a, I am against Robotnikism. Episode 3, Lovesick Sonic. When Sonic saves a female hedgehog named Breezy, he falls in love. Sonic does not know that Breezy is a robot Dr. Robotnik created to keep Sonic occupied while he floods a city near his fortress. So, we got some memes coming up, but we're gonna leave it for a second. this is the first instance in any Sonic media that we've talked about, at least, of Sonic being charmed by a woman.
Yeah, Sonic's a simp.
Sonic crossed with anyone but Sally is cursed.
I don't particularly like Sonic having any romantic afflictions, because I think that would get in the way of running fast. But, you know.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
I do appreciate that throughout the whole episode, Tails is not buying any of this.
Yes, I like that Tails is immediately suspicious.
Yes. This will be a recurring theme with his character throughout the show.
Whenever Sonic is dangerously heterosexual, Tails is there to reel him in, tell him what's right with the world.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a recurring theme too. It's a little strange. That's one part of his character in this show that I didn't expect.
Yeah, I found it interesting that Tails ends up being straight man's not the right word. The voice of reason, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because Sonic is like a cocky dick, but Tails doesn't really have a lot of confidence in himself, even after the episodes that are supposed to build his confidence. So
that weird part aside, near the end, I was actually impressed at. This is one of the more sensical plots of this show, and one where Robotnik is actually being smart and isn't just fooled by something stupid at the end. Because he's really got that 300 IQ in this episode, because he knows apparently that Sonic is weak to girls or whatever, and so he makes a robot fools him. Thing. I know, they got it wrong. And he makes the robot, but he doesn't even tell Scratch and Grounder about it, which I thought was really clever, because a recurring thing will be Scratch and Grounder are often the reason Robotnik loses.
More than Sonic, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps. So that was really smart. And then I think it's fitting that my headcanon is he made the robot too good. And so as a result, they actually legitimately were a love interest for Sonic and betrayed them. And I think that would be a poetic explanation for the defeat.
Leave it to Robotnik to accidentally teach an artificial intelligence what love is by accident.
Exactly.
I feel like Breezy, like this character, it would definitely be some Twitter post that says, "How did they get away with this character design?" if it weren't for the fact that her face is hideous. And this is going to be a recurring thing in this show where, you've got all of these, animal people, and some of them are, like, decently Sonic proportioned, but they all have weird, gross faces that don't look like anything that SEGA would put their name on.
So she kind of looks like you take Jessica Rabbit and then just, like, you just melt her down and try to reform her in a panicked state.
Jessica Rabbit spent a little too long in the microwave.
That's why she's green. She's irradiated.
Oh no. Robotnik, like, puts on, like, a war uniform in one part of this episode, and it really... I don't know what else you could say it is. He does a Sieg Heil?
Yeah, he's just a Nazi for an episode for no apparent reason. Or at least just for a scene.
Robotnik has lots of costumes throughout the show, which is another thing I love. It just sort of adds interest to each of the different episodes, and really adds to. I mean, he's got an eccentric personality and a lot of continuity, but even more so in this one. He's just like, no, I got to dress for the occasion, just for kicks.
Yeah.
Also, he reminds me, Robotnik, especially in this show, kind of reminds me of like the eccentric European billionaires. Excuse me, I mean one specific, and I don't remember his name, but a German fashion designer. I think he's dead, but like whenever in like a cartoon or a movie, you see the weird European, just like vaguely European fashion designer millionaire with like the thick square glasses. That's based off of him.
All right, well, I'll put the name in post.
If you can figure it out. If not, don't worry about it.
Well, you have to figure it out.
Well, fuck, I'll figure it out then.
Along the topic of Robotnik again, this is also one of the first lines I got where I'm like, oh wow, this guy is actually pretty bad. Because his plan in this one is to, like completely drown a town. But when he's explaining it to Scratch and Grounder, he's like, you see, look at that big, ugly, empty space in front of my fortress. As he gestures to a town he can clearly see, but he just doesn't care about it. He completely disregards it.
Yeah.
As far as he's
I think that's
concerned,
great.
they don't matter.
Yeah.
Sonic like thinks like, oh, I'll write a poem for Breezy in this episode, and the poem is bad. But what I like about it is that that's exactly what I'd expect from like a 15-year-old with no formal education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if Sonic is like a high school dropout.
Well, so you point out that being weak to girls is supposed to be Knuckles' thing, but like, yeah, Sonic's like 15. Of course, he's gonna immediately fall for any pretty girl he sees on the side of the road.
Yeah, that was more of a joke. It makes sense in the universe. It's just not. They usually don't do that.
Yeah, I know.
Sonic's status as a teenager has never been like super consistent with his character, so yeah.
Yeah.
So the Sonic Says for this episode, this is the That's No Good episode.
Ah, yes.
And so that is like, that might be the one, it's among the most, if not the most YouTube pooped thing of all time.
I can't think of anything except for maybe the CDI Mario games that are more
maybe the CDI games, yeah.
Yeah, the CDI Nintendo games. Other than them, it's gotta be That's No Good.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's obviously a kids show, so they can't quite use a term like sexual assault, you know, just explicitly, but it makes it awkward, like, seeing them try to explain, like, oh, you know, it's nice to get hugs from people.
From people that you like.
Yeah.
But...
You know, and it's a tricky thing. I feel like you should be more direct with kids, but I also know that a cartoon show, especially in the 90s, would have gotten taken off the air if it tried.
Oh yeah, 100%. It would be hard for even a cartoon now to just come out and outright say to use the words sexual harassment.
Yeah, well, even like Steven Universe still had to make it metaphorical with fusion, which isn't quite. It's not quite sexual. It's not quite romantic. It's
but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
It comes off as strange, I agree, but honestly, this is not one of the Sonic Says segments that I really fault. I think they did about as good as they could have.
Oh, it's a good message, and they did their best to try and explain it.
They must have made a lot of concessions with this show. I can't imagine that the budget was ginormous, and that's probably the reason that it has such an unhinged art style, is because...
Probably, they just did what they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, episode 4, Slowwww Going. Sonic must save a family of sloths from Dr. Robotnik's slow motion ray, but when he himself is slowed down by Scratch and Grounder, Tails and the sloth family must take action. And this is already something that annoys me in shows, is when a character is supposed to be talking slow, but they clearly just have the actor really slurring their lines. Like, just use a digital effect if you have to.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would be any better, really, but yeah, it is certainly annoying, I must agree. A large swath of the side characters that either show up only once or, like, twice, maybe, over the entire show, are pretty annoying, and they all seem to have some sort of gimmick to them.
That's what you gotta write when you can't write personalities. Yes,
I suppose so. Back to the lore. Interestingly, Robotnik mentions that it took them 9 years to make the Mobium Mega Crystal, which makes me think, were they really preparing for a long time to, like, build their empire or something? Or perhaps it was from their earlier days when they were a simple inventor. Either way, this is one of the first hints at Robotnik's greater past in this show.
Yes, it's gonna be fun unraveling some of that garbage. And by garbage, I mean, you know, masterwork of literary fiction, obviously.
That's right. Watch yourself. You get it right.
Speaking of masterful work, Sonic uses a crossing guard disguise in this episode, and Scratch sees through it, which is completely inconsistent with the rest of the series.
Not the entire thing. That's interesting. I missed that. Every now and then, Scratch, I don't think Grounder ever does.
I don't think Grounder ever does.
Except under special circumstances. Occasionally they will see through Sonic's disguises, but not generally. That's something that'll come up now and then. Because I tried to guess, are they getting smarter? No, it's more like they're inconsistently smart.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what's the difference. Did Sonic use, you know, a cheaper Party City to get his disguises this time?
I don't know. kind of just more little things here and there. A lot of my notes aren't huge lore, just things I liked. Like when it comes to gobbledygook, I really like it drastically curtails molecular motion when Robotnik describes the slow ray or whatever. That's just great. Oh, here's a thing. So Tails mentions their age in this episode, 4.5. They're 4.5. That's crazy. Either ages are different for foxes, or they're really out of their league.
Yeah, I don't know. Tails' age has always been inconsistent. Like, sometimes he's 8, sometimes he's 12, depending on which game you look at.
Oh, I see. This episode also starts to bring in the fact that this show will have continuity, because Scratch and Grounder mentioned the reward money from episode 1 in this when they're getting excited about capturing Sonic. And I'm like, what? This show actually remembers past episodes? And though the plot does reset, basically, not everything is erased between episodes.
When the slow ray becomes a fast ray, why doesn't Tails use it on himself? That's one of the notes that I have written down here. But frankly, if I counted things like that in the show, we would have one of those for almost every episode, so I'm not even going to say it.
You are quite right in that regard. This also is when I noticed a little sort of blink and you miss it detail. This show has a number of those where the action is focused on one thing, but then like something off to the side is actually something funny going on. So when Tails, I think, comes to save Sonic in the cave and Scratch comes up to like stop him, as he gets up, you can see Scratch draw an extra card because he's playing Go Fish, I think, with Scratch, and then put his cards down with a mischievous smile, which makes me think that he like drew an extra card or something and he's cheating, which is just great.
That's like actually good characterization, because it's done non-verbally and not inherently important to the entire, universe.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I really hate that Scratch and Grounder eat sausages. They're basically not really... Either robots can just do a lot of things that don't make sense in this universe, or the writers don't understand robots, or Scratch and Grounder are like not... It confuses me, and I shouldn't think too hard about it, but I do anyway.
I don't know if they ever use the word badnik in this show, because I don't know if they're badniks. If they have animals inside them, that would almost make sense. But they never show anything like that.
Yeah. I don't know if they actually use the word badnik. I think they do. I had to think about it.
Episode 5, High Stakes Sonic. Sonic and Tails infiltrate Robotnik's new Casino Night Zone to stop him and his henchmen from scamming a group of sheep into becoming Robotnik slaves. It's not Casino Night Zone, but
Yes, here we go again.
It's more Casino Night Zone than the one in the Archie comics, I suppose.
Well, I mean, if it's a casino... I guess it's not at night. It's close enough for me, really. Obviously, in a more story-based comic, or I guess the show... I mean, the show is more story than the game still, so it's going to be different for that reason. It's not all just, dodging obstacles or what have you.
I suppose.
This is a one-off character I actually do kind of like. Smiley, the card shark that is literally a shark. That's their gimmick, but... I think they're kind of swish, actually. I found them fairly amusing. Also, it was interesting because this showed that Robotnik doesn't just use robots; they have actual, animal agents as well in this show. So that is interesting, and that is going to be consistent throughout.
Makes more sense for just about every Sonic universe. There's this part at the start of this episode where Sonic says, "Let's find out where they're coming from," and then he runs in the opposite direction.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. That is funny. Sort of along these lines. Usually Sonic is pretty smart, perhaps beaten only by Tails, but he makes a really stupid mistake in this episode by leaving Tails behind in Casino Night Zone that is built by Robotnik. He knows that, and then Tails gets in a trap with the ball pit, and I'm like, that was crazy. Usually Sonic is pretty smart, but not this time.
I can trust Robotnik with my 4-year-old. Just put him in the ball pit. Nothing bad will happen. I wouldn't trust a child alone in like a McDonald's ball pit, much less one run by Eggman.
Although I will say, it does lead to an interesting plot point. I wouldn't expect Robotnik in this show to use a hostage situation on Sonic, but as becomes obvious, the show goes on. Mostly, this Robotnik is pretty cartoonishly evil, although he's also genuinely evil at times. He also has really good dialogue now and again. When Sonic says, you don't honestly expect your scumbot to beat me, do you? And then Robotnik's retort is, honestly? Of course not. I never do anything honestly. That just got
I know, he doesn't care whether Sonic wins the race, and that's exactly the behavior I want from this character.
I will say, though, that when the ghoulish heads of Robotnik laugh at Sonic, I think they were trying to be, like, dramatic, but it just comes off ridiculous.
I know, I think that's, like, the source of, like, a popular, like, meme edit with
Yeah,
Sonic looking all sad.
That would be good for that.
There's something, like, kind of amazing about how the Robotnik gang, this is consistent throughout the whole show, is that the Robotnik gang, Eggman and his two robots, they're always, like, usually polite and reasonable to every, like, service or industry worker that they meet, but all of them are Sonic.
That is true. You know, I had that thought. I kind of just brushed it off in my mind instead of actually noting it, but it is weird that if they actually believe they're a service worker, why are they so polite? And that's just funny.
Yeah. Episode 6, Sonic Breakout. Robotnik imprisons a satirical cartoonist named Sketch Lampoon for making fun of him in his comic book, much to the anger of Sonic, his biggest fan. Sonic purposefully allows his own capture as well, but does not expect to be placed in a maximum security jail cell. With Robotnik angrily... This synopsis is fucking dumb. With Robotnik angrily sends Sonic in the cell for interfering with his plans once again.
Okay, then.
It's weird that that Robotnik is drawn as Humpty Dumpty in the political cartoon because he's Eggman, but I don't even know if the show creators knew that.
No, it's a recurring thing in this show that Robotnik is somehow related to eggs with insults and the fact that later he really likes eggs.
Okay. It's very weird seeing them reference the Japanese canon like that when the kids watching would not know or care.
I always just thought it was sort of a clever combination of that and then also Humpty Dumpty make the kids laugh. But yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, I suppose.
At this point, my notes are still not grasping the way the show is put together, and I'm still like, what's the governmental structure of this? Because obviously there's a lack of, like, police enforcement because no one tries to stop, like, Scratch and Grounder from kidnapping the cartoonist. But at the same time, like, the citizens are left to their own governance, like, outside of Robotnik's fortress. But then I realized it's actually just inconsistency on the part of this episode later on, and there are, like, police and stuff, but they just don't stop Scratch and Grounder for some reason.
I think they wrote the show by the seat of their pants.
They did. Yes, that is quite true. Is it also? Oh yeah, this is the episode where Robotnik is bragging about their past to the cartoonist, and he mentions that he genetically modified his class hamster in school to turn into a tapeworm, which is funny. I didn't think we'd get more on his schooling days, but we do.
It's impressive, but why would you do that?
Yes. He was thinking so hard about whether he could that he didn't think to stop and wonder if he should.
Yeah, and then the guy from Seinfeld laughs at you, I remember.
Okay, good. Oh yeah, another thing. This is actually consistent through later in the show. Robotnik imprisons Sonic and then just leaves him there. Like, he's content to leave him imprisoned and not, like, whatever, kid-friendly, maybe not killed, but whatever. I don't know what it would be, and that's probably the reason, because it's kid-friendly, but it is consistent in the show that he doesn't actually want to kill Sonic usually, although sometimes he does try to. Well, a lot of the time, but I would like to think that he knows that he wouldn't actually succeed in that most of the time. I don't know, I'm reading this too deeply, but it's interesting that he captures him, and that is what he obviously is after, and that is consistent.
It is funny since other Sonic canons have to eventually come up with, like, logic for why he doesn't. But this show is just light and nothing enough that it's just like, he doesn't kill him because he wants to make him smell his feet or something. I don't know.
Right, yeah. The computer that runs the prison in this episode sounds, like, so bored and, like, fed up with their job. And it made me realize that a lot of the badniks in this show don't want to work for Robotnik, which is kind of weird because he made them.
I disagree. I think that's a recurring thing across a lot of different Sonic series, and I enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah, because, I mean, you're going to see that with Orbot and Cubot as well.
Well, I'm not familiar with them, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I was more thinking... in the games, a lot of the robots don't have much personality. They're just enemies. But I guess if they have a personality, then maybe that's it. Maybe it's like... if they're complex enough, then they'll realize that Robotnik is a terrible boss. But if they're simple, then they'll just listen to him.
Oh yeah, we want the Badnik Revolution. That could be a really fun idea, actually. I'm surprised they haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
It's hilarious that the PSA in this episode is about graffitiing being bad, and then, like, less than a decade later, SEGA publishes Jet Set Radio, a cop-fighting rollerblading graffiti game. I
Oh
mean,
my gosh,
it's, you know,
yeah.
it's barely related, but it's just a funny coincidence, especially since Sonic has kind of an anti-authority streak to it as a series, which is going to
Yep.
be even weirder with some of the other PSAs.
Some of the PSAs are strange. Yes, we'll get there.
All right. Episode 7, Trail of the Missing Tails. Robotnik's insane cousin, Dr. Warpnik, captures Tails and lures Sonic into his zone of confusion in order to enact revenge on Robotnik for banishing him. Only the deepest of lore here.
So, yes, now we're getting some real lore dumps here. Spoilers, this is Warpnik's only appearance, which is a real shame, I must say, but it nonetheless does shed light on Robotnik's past. I can't help but draw parallels, though, because I'm like, wait a minute. Banished to the Warp of Confusion. Ixis Naugus? No, not really.
Oh, I thought you were
But
going to compare
I
it to the
thought of it.
Phantom Zone.
Oh, no, Superman. No, I'm in Sonic mode. I have
Hey,
no
I
thoughts.
know
for
that
other
you
media.
like the first two Superman movies, because I like them, and you
No,
told me you liked them.
No, I like them. But that is funny.
Sorry.
But yes, anyway, Robotnik's cousin, not the only relative you will see of his, but apparently they have a bit of a rivalry, which is pretty entertaining, actually. As I said, I would have liked to see Warpnik again. I mean, he's a bit over the top, goofy, insane, crazy, but at the same time, I kind of like it, as I kind of am annoyed by it, which is kind of a vibe that I get from a lot of this show, to be honest. But Robotnik usually gets out his robots or his crazy weapons or whatever, but it's clear that from a young age, Robotnik and Warpnik sort of, just hit each other with their toys or whatever, because that is what they revert to when they fight each other in this. They're like hitting each other with fish, and they fight over who has control over Warpnik's device, which is equally wacky, by the way. It like turns things into crazy versions of themselves. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's entertaining. I like it.
I like Warpnik's dimension, but not for the reason that the show wants me to. I like it because it's nigh indistinguishable from the regular setting of the show.
You're kind of right. That's true. But speaking of that, so the Warp of Confusion, right? Yes. The only thing is that something notable happens near the end of the episode when Scratch, Grounder, and Coconuts get hit by Warpnik's device, and then they decide to outright betray Robotnik, which kind of caught me off guard. I realized I didn't like their job, but I didn't realize they'd go that far. And at first I wondered, okay, is it like an effect of the device? Did it like wreck them or something? But no, I think most of the time, and we'll go over every instance that I can remember anyway, Scratch and Grounder, given the opportunity, will betray Robotnik in this show.
Yeah, it becomes a running theme in a couple of Sonic shows, actually. And I wish that at some point that it stuck, because it would be a nice change of pace.
It would be interesting. I'm not sure that they would do very well on their own, but I'd be up for a change of status quo.
Episode 8, Close Encounter of the Sonic Kind. Sonic and Tails help an alien prince fix his space shuttle to return to his home planet for coronation to become king, or else his younger brother will be crowned in his place and destroy Mobius. This episode is a strong contender for the laziest title of any of the episodes of this show.
Honestly, was not impressed by most of the titles, but yes, that's true.
Because it's not a pun, it's just, you just took Close Encounter of the Third Kind and put the word Sonic in there. At least in Rick and Morty, they do it on purpose because that show's like a joke and stupid. Which maybe this show is also a joke.
I was about to
stupid.
say you could say the same about this, but I don't.
But
think
this
it was
feels less purposeful.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I was impressed that the dumb joke where Grounder loses their nose was turned into an important plot point in this episode.
Where it's like the nose cone of the ship.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, that's like this show actually kind of being surprising me and being a little clever.
I feel like it's weird to coexist with a brother who just wants to commit like planetary genocide.
Well, okay, so the joke at the end of the episode is that the brother is like a baby and they don't know what they're saying because they're like, he also doesn't like his vegetables or something. That was the way I
guess
interpreted
maybe
it
it's
anyway.
that it's weird to exist in a society where infants are compelled to commit planetary genocide. This guy should have been a Saiyan, that's what I'm saying.
Yes. These aliens fall into the subset of like pretty jokey, don't not take them too seriously aliens that would destroy the world in like an instant. which is used from time to time in other works of fiction.
Oh, certainly.
But yes, it is weird. It's also interesting that Robotnik doesn't seem fazed, or anyone for that matter, by the presence of aliens. So apparently that's just an accepted thing.
If you want to exist in this world's universe, there's just some things you have to accept.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, so here's another thing where the show actually realizes what it's doing. Because there's a part where Sonic is going to use a disguise to trick Scratch and Grounder, but then he's like, nah. He just doesn't for some reason. Like, the writers realize he does it all the time. Of course, this is only episode 8, and they do not stop it in any regard.
This is the first of several times where Sonic cross-dresses as well. I've been keeping account of that in this show and Underground.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, we'll get to a later one. But
Underground is a little bit gross with it. This show is mostly banal.
There was one time, but yes, I agree for the most part. Oh, okay, I was impressed. Okay, this episode doesn't really have a whole lot of deaths, but there's a number of things now and then that I'm like, oh, okay, that was actually kind of cool. That was kind of cool. The other one is the way they solved the plot. So it was obvious that the rocks were lined up like dominoes. And earlier, Robotnik mentions that the Egomatic needed a tune-up. And both those things are important for his defeat at the end, because they use the rocks as dominoes, and then the Egomatic can't take off, so he gets hit by the final one. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. It's a sort of we set up all the pieces of the puzzle, and you could have seen it coming, which is in stark contrast to usually they just make up something random at the end to solve the plot.
Yeah, it's usually not quite Deus Ex Machina, but pretty close.
Indeed.
Episode 9, Momma Robotnik's Birthday. Robotnik's obnoxious mother visits her son on her birthday and expects a present. After he fails to destroy a nearby forest as a present, however, she decides to capture Sonic as her own gift.
Momma Robotnik is my favorite of the non-main characters.
Momma Robotnik was pretty great.
Legitimately kind of intimidating. She seems to be more competent at evil than her son.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Every time she shows up, the stakes are raised.
I like to imagine almost that this is more similar to like the game timeline than we think, and like she's the one who inspired Robotnik to be evil. It had nothing to do with like Gerald Robotnik or anything. Robotnik's mom was just such a terrible person that he was like, I'm gonna be terrible too.
I mean, that is kind of the implication. She often gets mad at him for like telling the truth instead of lying, or not being nasty enough in some way or another. So, yeah, I think that's the idea. It is interesting, though, because one question that is never answered, and I would love to make an interesting theory about, is there's a Momma Robotnik, but why is there no Papa Robotnik?
Well, maybe Robotnik himself is a bad Nick.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, well, that would explain...
You'd have to theorize pretty hard for that to actually be true. I would think it would have come up at some point.
Oh, of course.
But it's a fun idea nonetheless.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess Momma Robotnik being as terrible as she is, you could say it recontextualizes Robotnik's behavior as the cycle of abuse. But
yeah,
I don't think this show is that prepared to make a statement like that.
Well, I mean, it's obvious that Momma Robotnik's treatment of Robotnik mirrors Robotnik's treatment of Scratch and Grounder.
Right.
So even if they didn't come out with it, I think that's the idea.
Yeah. Sonic puts Momma Robotnik into a home.
Yes.
Well, yeah, that's where she broke out of originally.
Yeah, so does that mean a Robotnik put her in the home in the first place?
See, I'm gonna come back to this later.
Oh,
I don't
boy.
know why she was put in the home exactly, but I don't think it was Robotnik, because when Momma Robotnik shows up, Robotnik is basically reduced to a child again. He is terrified of his mother. I don't think he'd have the courage to put her away in a home.
So
like
it was
that.
the government.
I would have to imagine, yeah.
Maybe Dad Robotnik did it, and then him not being around, she put out a hit on him from inside the home.
Jesus.
Oh dear.
Well,
Hardcore,
wait,
more
is it an
serious
old folks
version of
home or an
Adventures.
asylum?
My theory is that it's an old folks home, but I think it's supposed to be a mental asylum, because
Well, if it's
the
an
people
asylum,
that
it
come
makes sense. If it's an old folks home, then Papa Robotnik needs to be there too. But
right, but I think it's supposed to be a mental asylum, because the people who come pick her up are in white dress pants and a white button up, which is always portrayed as like the mental asylum employee.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's the idea. The
Yeah.
actual name is the Mobius Home for Really Bizarre Mothers, so do with that as you will.
So that name is what made me think it was an old folks' home. Maybe it's both.
That's also really weird because here's the thing though that gets to me is that she's not any more insane than her son. She's just better at it.
Right. I think maybe that corroborates it being an old folks' home for the crazy old folks. And
That's why
Robotnik's
nobody
just
stops
not old enough.
Robotnik is because he's not enough of a danger to be properly institutionalized.
Right.
Yeah, Momma Robotnik, in either all or almost all of her appearances. Oh yeah, spoiler, she shows up again. Is defeated because she's taken back to the home.
Right.
So that definitely implies that she's locked up because she's dangerous.
Right.
That makes me think, is that the only institution like that? Because that means that all of the most dangerous people in the Adventures of Sonic canon are mothers.
Oh boy.
We're getting Freudian here. Maybe we should move on.
All right, if you'd like.
Episode 10, Big Daddy. We're playing Bioshock, boys. After being exiled by Robotnik, Coconuts finds a lost baby gorilla who thinks he is his father. Coconuts attempts to use the gorilla to stop Sonic. The baby gorilla's father, meanwhile, is under the control of Robotnik, and Sonic has to save him. It was weird going to this episode right after the Momma Robotnik episode.
Right.
And it's one of those episodes that almost feels like one of the villains is the protagonist, but then it just abandons that partway through. We'll have another one with Scratch like that later.
You know, it's funny. I often forget about Coconuts. He's like, he's the third wheel of the lackeys, and I forget about him all the time.
That's why he's usually relegated to janitorial duty.
Poor Coconuts. Yeah, but he still shows up every now and then, and yeah, you're right. In this episode, he does get quite a focus.
It's very funny because across the Sonic series, Clucker and Grounder as Badniks show up way less than Coconuts. Kikis are everywhere.
That is true. I was interested that up until this point, Robotnik just has plots to cause basically misery or chaos, but this episode he's like, no. Now I'm gonna take over the whole world by the most convoluted means possible. Cause no. I'm not just going to like make a big old laser cannon. No. I have to take over this big old gorilla or whatever and then make it hold the laser cannon. I don't know why he has to do that, but it's interesting that he does go to that scale in this episode.
Not a very impressive first, like, world-saving story for this show.
No, not really. The solution is equally unimpressive, although actually kind of funny, because when they're, like, trying to talk through and get through to the Big Daddy, I thought there was going to be, like, the power of love, but then, like, they just smash it by, like, manipulating the baby into, like, smashing it without knowing what they're doing. And I'm like,
the power
okay.
of causality.
Yes.
So I've been keeping a counter for how many times this show made me laugh, and I don't remember what it was by the end, but this was the first one, which was, "Did you hear that? Unnecessary! We got promoted from useless!"
You stole my next line. I was about to bring up that bit, but yeah, I have to agree. Yes, that bit was pretty great. Which it also pairs nicely because the prompt for it is one of Robotnik's great evil lines when he says, "And now in my wicked wisdom, I'm about to make you both unnecessary." It sounds so menacing.
Well, yeah, because it's, you say to another sentient being, "I'm done with you. You provide no worth to me." And then they're just like, "Oh, neat."
It is pretty great. Yeah, I like that. This doesn't really come up again later, but this once again calls back to apparently Robotnik is very fond of their Egomatic. Just kind of a random thing. It doesn't stick, unfortunately. I thought it was going to, but they forget about it. Oh well.
No. Episode 11, Sonic's Song. Outraged by a popular song about Sonic, Robotnik outlaws music on Mobius and takes the song's composer captive with the intent of creating his own song. And the first thing that I need to mention off the bat is that this song sucks. It's just the regular Sonic music, but with some lady singing over it, and it's about nothing. You couldn't have put a little effort in. Like, it's low-tier Sonic Underground song, honestly.
Well, I don't really like the Sonic Underground songs for the most part either.
Neither do I, that's the point.
Yeah. Oh, okay, there you go then. Yeah, no, I'm kind of with Robotnik on this one. Oh yeah, I have a note here that Robotnik is actually the hero of this episode because he's trying to stop that really annoying song about Sonic. So there you go. I couldn't help but see the parallels here too with Mean Bean Machine, because in that one he wants to rid the planet of music and fun forever, and I'm like, this is probably where it came from.
Yeah, I actually think that's a good bit of concurrency, because Robotnik hating music is a really weird character trait, but it's a trait nonetheless.
Yeah.
There's also Robotnik has a map of Mobius, but apparently in Adventures of Sonic, Mobius is just one big supercontinent.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, that's true. I know there are at least islands as well, but I mean it could be forged, but Robotnik actually presents a doctorate offhandedly in this episode, so I'm like, they actually explained why he's called Dr. Robotnik, sort of. Whereas in other canons, he just is. It's because he's smart. I mean, that's not.
In Sonic Boom, he only has a PhD.
What? Well, then they're addressing.
And I think it may be implied that it's like one that he bought on the internet. I don't remember actually specifically. That might be a joke from one of the comics. I'm not sure.
Okay, that would do it. Yeah. Also, another bit of subtlety regarding Robotnik, which I thought was going to be like, like I've seen something that was easy to miss, but it comes up very obviously later when Scratch and Grounder are like picking up some readout from a machine, and they start to read like a dating site posting or something from Robotnik, and I'm like, this is something interesting about his character, but it comes up again later too.
Speaking of Scratch and Grounder, laugh number 2 for me came when they were singing and dancing, and then I don't remember what it was that upset them, but it meant that they had to keep singing and dancing while also bursting into tears.
Oh. Yeah.
Here's a question.
Yes.
Why would a robot built to destroy music be vulnerable to music?
I wouldn't question such a thing, but I mean, it's supposed to be that it like hates music, right? And so I guess that was the way they made it hate it, is because it hurts it. But you're right,
That's
kind of
stupid.
illogical. Yeah.
That's like if friggin' Frankenstein's purpose was to be a firefighter. Actually, that's a really funny idea for like just a comedic novel like Discworld or Hitchhiker's Guide or something. And that's the end of this episode. Feel free to share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed, and if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can always reach us at deepdivezone on Twitter or deepdivezone@gmail.com. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.